Hello, Dobbs. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I am excited and very curious to speak with you about brave spaces.
Excellent, excellent. I'm excited to expound on it.
Yeah, and to hear about the research you did around that. And before we dive into that, I always start with the same question. When did you
Mhm.
start calling yourself a facilitator? Actually, do you?
I do. So I probably started around 2007 when I first started my first iteration of my consulting business. I don't know that I started with facilitator, but I feel like it was a title that was kind of thrusted upon me as I was figuring out the services that I offer, kind of what I do, and I guess kind of where I belong in that space of consulting, facilitation, teaching, speaking, and I know I stumbled upon that at some point, and it just stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it adds so much to the presence of the of a consultant if there is some facilitation to it, because then it suddenly means that you're not only telling the client but actually involving them in the solution process, I assume.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And helping them with the learning process, engaging them from a different perspective and hopefully coming up with some creative, engaging, and maybe even fun, entertaining ways to help the organization learn more about themselves from an outside perspective. Right. So um and that's again something that I didn't know that I even offered until I started doing it. So I'm
Mm.
saying this now on this end, but I didn't really look at it that way initially when I first started, and probably even using the title of facilitator. I didn't even know that that's what I was doing until I started doing it more and more and seeing the value that I'm adding for them as well as for myself, the value that you get as a facilitator. So,
Oh, tell me more.
yeah, so I always tell folks at the end when I'm kind of wrapping up that, I learned so much from my role as a facilitator. I tell them a little bit about what I've learned, that day throughout those series of sessions, whatever it was. And I like most, like a lot of people in this space, am a lifelong learner. So as much as I think I'm imparting on the participants, I'm learning just as much. And I may not always know in the moment, but very often I'm working with a client, and then I'll utilize some information that I didn't get from a book, I didn't get from a colleague, but I got from a previous session.
Mm.
Um, and the way I like to facilitate it is, I use the Socratic method very often. I'll start off with, very open-ended questions and move the conversation in the direction and hit the points that I want to, utilizing their responses. And because of that, it looks like it can seem chaotic because you don't know where they're going to go, right? But when you've done it enough, it's like orchestrating, individuals with different instruments. I don't know what they're going to play, but I have a plan in my head, and you find a place for everyone to fall in the sheet of music. But in the process of doing that, I'm learning because like I said, I don't know what everyone's going to say, so I'm learning. Oh, I didn't know people felt that way about this topic, and oh, I didn't know someone would have this background, might think this. And I've worked with groups that are in very specific sectors. I've worked with a group of attorneys that
Mm.
was very, with the same topic as a group of engineers, with a group of healthcare workers, and they all have very different perspectives and different ideas about the very same topic. And I utilize that information sometime in the future when I'm working with another client. I say, people that are typically in the field of law probably do this, but people who tend to be more boots on the ground and work in the healthcare sector think more like this. And like, oh, and I didn't even know I knew that until it becomes relevant. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, you're always kind of unofficially gathering information, intel about your participants, your topic, just life in general, and connecting dots.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I can go on and on about that, but yeah.
And I can only assume that that's where your background, you have a PhD. So your background in research then comes back where you collect data points, put them together, use them to create the next step, basically.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes, it's less scientific because you're doing it in real time. So oftentimes I'll connect dots as I'm speaking in the workshop. So I'm going off my own script, if you will. And that happens often because, like I said, I'm utilizing the Socratic method. I start with a question to ultimately get to a certain point, but through people's um, uh, responses, then I end up, having an aha moment that's very relevant in the workshop. And then I'll say that out loud, like, you know what? So A and B equals C. And then people are like, oh, I'm like, I just thought of that myself. And then sometimes if I feel like it's that good, I'll jot it down and use it for another workshop or for a book or whatever it might be. But yeah, but you're always collecting data officially or unofficially, connecting dots, and helping people do the same. I try not to do that for people in a workshop, which is another reason why I ask questions. I try to ask the questions that get them to have the aha moment instead of me having to tell you the aha moment. So I try to get them to ask questions and go, oh, I see. I like that light bulb moment. You see it go off
Mm-hmm.
before they even respond. You see it in their eyes, or in their facial expression, like, oh, I get it. I get it. And it's all because you asked them a question. And I think they learn more from that experience as opposed to me telling them, you all need this, or this is the answer. I feel like they
Yeah.
don't get as much out of
Yeah.
that. I'm not saying they don't get anything out of it, but I feel like they don't get as much as responding themselves.
Yeah. I agree. And I think especially when in adult learning and when we work with highly intelligent participants,
Hmm.
they all know so much. And if we
Absolutely.
then come and talk to them as if they're the students, we're the teachers,
Hmm.
I don't think that there is so much learning because there is a lot of annoyance.
Right.
And also, I think, why would we do so much of the heavy lifting, assuming their knowledge gaps? If we can ask them a question, then they fill the gaps for themselves and make sense of it.
Right, right. And I have to admit, sometimes too, I understand that I might be asking the participants a question that they might not have the answer to, and that's okay. But hopefully it helps them understand the gap in their learning to go, you know what? I've never even asked that. I need to sit down. This workshop may not be enough space for me to answer that, and that's okay because not everything is going to fit in the tight parameters of my workshop. If my workshop is an hour, a half day, maybe it's 2 days, you might not answer this question. In the time frame of this workshop, and life is too complex to feel like you have to, but at least you understand there's a gap there. Like, you know what? I've never thought of that. Let me start thinking like that, or let me now start the discovery to find the answer to that question. Why do I lead this way? Or what is a brace rate? Whatever it might be. And I let people know that too, because I feel like sometimes people will get mentally trapped in the confines of the parameters of your learning experience. So, for example, if my workshop's a half day, some people might assume you're going to have the answers to these questions, or you're going to completely understand these objectives in these 4 hours. Like, that's not it. Like, so I try to be very explicit to tell people in the beginning of the workshop when I'm going over the objectives to say, you might not have the answers at the end of our time together, or you might only understand half of this, but at least for you, real, you lifelong learners, truly curious people and professionals, you will hopefully start the journey to answering these questions. And that's the big thing is, encouraging you to get on this journey that maybe you weren't even on at all. And I can say that as someone who loves learning, I've certainly done that myself. I've sat in a session and I can't tell you that I learned everything that the facilitator, the professor, whoever it was trying to teach, but what it did was it sparked something to go, you know what? I'm gonna start reading more about that, or I'm gonna start looking out for that from now on, or whatever it might be. And that started something. And that, at the very least, is what I hope to do is at least spark something to
Yeah.
get you thinking differently and get you on a different journey.
Mm. And I love the philosophy in that we cannot teach everything in that time anyway, and they
Right.
will, by a matter of fact, as a matter of fact, they will forget most of it. But
But yes, you will.
if we can plant a seed of curiosity, if we
Hmm.
can spark the interest in them in that session, so that after the session they do the learning themselves, I think
Yeah,
then we have achieved the goal. Because, I mean, to be honest, most of the content that we can teach in a session, they can also find somewhere else.
absolutely.
The curiosity and this kind of little Kickstarter to
Yeah,
get them going, that's something that's unique to the session.
absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely.
thank you. How did you how did you get to the topic of brave spaces?
Miriam, that's
What
an
does it
excellent
mean?
question because that the answer to that really plays off of what we just talked about. So I was a participant in a workshop a couple of years ago, and it was about having tough conversations. And one of the other participants brought up the idea of a brave space, and I'd never heard that before. I heard of a safe space, and that's what just kind of intrigued me. So I just jotted down that term because a participant just made a quick comment about it. No one else said anything about it. So I wrote it down for me to explore that more on my own later. So anyway, so fast forward maybe, I don't know, a month later, a couple months later, I just did some light research on the topic, and one of my clients contacted me and said, "Hey, we would love for you to do, we're having a retreat. I would love for you to do a workshop for my group of leaders. Can you throw out some topics for me?" And I said, "Sure." So I gave three topics total. One of them was around a brave space. And the other two topics I've done 1,000 times. And the brave space I had not done before. I'd researched and read about it and things of that nature, but I hadn't built a workshop on it before. And they said, of course, when they chose the workshop, it was the brave space. I was like, oh, of course, the one that I haven't done is that one. But I was interested in finally, creating something around that and seeing how it applies because almost to my point earlier, as much as I would love and was eager to uh, teach this group of leaders about a brave space and how it can apply to the way they lead, I was also eager to hear feedback and learn myself. Like, tell me more about how this applies to you. Tell me more about how challenging conversations may use a space like this. So that's how I stumbled upon that topic, and that's how I started designing things around a brave space, and then. I loved it. That first workshop, I loved it. The participants seemed to love it, and I'm as usual. I'm typically jotting down just kind of gaps in the learning to say, oh man, like it'd be great to learn more about how a brave space applies to not just a one-on-one dynamic, but maybe a small group, and how does it apply to individuals who are new leaders. And I'm jotting down all these things I didn't address in that workshop, and then I'm building on it, and I did another workshop on it, and it just kept growing until I decided to just kind of jump all in. And maybe about a year ago, I started a deep dive on all the literature. So, um, for those folks who are, familiar with what it is to, get a doctoral degree, you have to do a literature review, essentially, where you read all the scholarly, articles and things of that nature on the topic. So that's what I did around a brave space. So it was roughly 70 something articles, roughly. And, um, and after digesting all that, I tried to identify where the gaps were, and there was several because this is still a fairly new kind of practice, and this is like 2013 roughly. And one of the big kind of glaring gaps that I decided to focus on was the idea of risk. So when you create a brave space, just to define what it is. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes,
Okay,
this
yeah.
would have been my question. How do you define it so that those who have never heard about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So when you create a brave space essentially is like the short way I love to describe it is uh it's comfort with a certain degree of um it's constructive discomfort, if you will. I'll say that it's constructive discomfort. So, and if you think about having challenging conversations, if you're creating a brave space, you're essentially attempting to have a challenging conversation with an individual, a group of individuals, and you're trying to find a way to engage in this challenging conversation and grow together while you're both existing in like or exist outside of your comfort zone. Um, and that's what's challenging about it. And when you do so, when you're trying to have this conversation outside of your comfort zone, you're taking a risk. There's a certain degree of risk. One of the gaps that I noticed in the literature when creating a brave space, existing in a brave space, was how do you teach this concept of a brave space to professionals, people with varying degrees of risk tolerance. Like, how do you do that? Because not everybody takes risks, and engages with risk in a professional setting the same way.
Yeah.
So I wanted to explore that more because I know in my work and practice with professionals and talking about leadership and how to be better professionals and work together and create stronger teams, Some people are risk takers and they're all in. They'll do whatever it takes. They throw caution to the wind. They'll do anything. And then you have people on the other side of the spectrum where they're like, I don't know, and I need to see other people do it first, and I need to see proof that it, then you have everybody in between. So if you were teaching people how to create a brave space where you're going to engage in a very challenging conversation, that's a very challenging proposition in and of itself. And you have people who are, like I said, risk takers who I'll dive right in, whatever, I don't care. And then you have people who are risk averse and say, I don't want to do that. There's too much on the line. And understandably so, especially when you're dealing with conversations around identity, around, race and gender, and then especially around power dynamics as well. So when you're dealing with, again, still race, gender, but then also when you're dealing with varying degrees of power within an organization. So I wanted to study more about what it is to analyze people's risk tolerance and their propensity to want to engage in a brave space or not. And then I also, obviously, I'm collecting demographic information to say, does it vary based on their race? Does it vary based on their gender? Does it vary based on their hierarchy in the organization as well? So that's kind of what I'll be looking at in kind of my studying a brave space and ultimately writing a book on it. And then the last piece I'll say about a brave space is in studying a brave space and looking at all the research, it initially was created and applied to be helpful in an educational setting. That is, from a teacher's perspective, for students to create a brave space, for them to talk about difficult topics and lean into these uncomfortable conversations and learn, from that engagement. So I'm applying a brave space to a professional setting. So that's kind of yet another still kind of new. I don't want to say it's completely new, like no one's done it, but I don't think anybody's researched that at length and what it looks like to apply this concept in a professional setting for an organization to take on this idea of a brave space. So I'll pause there, see what questions you have.
Yeah, thank you. And there's so much to unpack there. First, what I'm intrigued about, because I think before this interview, I wasn't sure, okay, where's the distinction between a safe space and a brave space? Because
Yeah.
I've often heard people basically turning safe spaces, just calling them brave spaces to have a little bit of variety. Whereas here, I really see the upskill where in safe space, it is safe enough to have tough conversations. But what I understand now from the brave space is these are intentionally created to have this constructive discomfort, to step into these conflictual or challenging conversations.
Yeah, and to your point too about a safe space and a brave space, I'll also say this about a safe space, which so a safe space, to add to that, like you said, it certainly prioritizes comfort and emotional well-being,
Mhm.
which makes it, just by definition different from a brave space, to where obviously you're not trying to harm anyone in a brave space necessarily, but you're existing in this discomfort. And you're figuring out how to turn this discomfort uh, into a unifying kind of entity between you and the other individual or individuals, so you can become closer as a team as opposed to fracturing that
Yeah.
team. So how do you do that? Whereas if I'm prioritizing comfort in a safe space, um, I mean, we may broach the tough topic, but that's not the priority. The priority is, are you okay? So the analogy I always think of is like I think about like running into a burning building. If you see a house on fire, a building on fire, and if I am taking a safe space approach, I want this individual to exist outside of this burning building. And I want to ask, are you okay? Did the fire affect you? Are you even hot just standing outside this burning building? Do we need to pull away even further? Because I'm trying to make sure you're okay so you can do whatever, so you can share, so you can, whatever it might be. In a brave space, I'm going to invite someone, because in a brave space, you invite people to it. You don't tell people. So I'm going to invite this person, hey, there's some things we need to tackle inside this burning building, which is X, Y, and Z. How do you feel about partnering with me, putting on these fire coats and going inside and tackling these tough topics? And hopefully, when we come out this burning building, you and I be a stronger team together, and we'll know more about each other because of it. What do you think about that, right? That's very different from the safe space type idea.
I yes. I think I have a different understanding of a safe space,
Hmm.
and would not want to go on the tangent to discuss about safe spaces and definitions. And I would like to focus on the brave spaces. And
Right.
I love the image that you have created, that the brave space means putting on the coats and going into the discomfort, because that is
Right.
the goal. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's the target. And I would be curious about a few things.
Hmm.
Um, One is, who is responsible to for creating it? Because it sounds a little bit like you don't want to have the brave spaces all the time. It sounds like something that you intentionally do to practice something, because
Hmm.
it sounds as if it increases your stress response.
Yeah.
So it is high adrenaline. It is something to create maybe a muscle. It's like a high intensity training, right? It's like a
Right.
gym. Um,
Right. Right.
and you don't want that all the time, because otherwise
Mm.
you burn out
Right.
or you fall into the stress response, and then you become, yeah, um, you create conflict that you cannot manage, that overwhelms. So who is in charge of creating it? And how do you invite people in? Can you opt out? There's so many questions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So who is responsible for creating a brave space? Everyone can create a brave space. And in an organization, um, ordinarily what you want as you're trying to set the tone for culture, you'd want that tone to be set ideally by leadership, right? Now, again, anyone can do it, but ideally in a perfect world, you would want leadership to first exhibit what this looks like. And you want leadership to take the lead on setting the culture for creating a brave space and, identify when a brave space is needed and take the initiative to create a brave space. Again, in a perfect world, but realistically, anyone can create a brave space. And I think one of the checkpoints, if you will, this goes to your second point, can someone like decline necessarily? So one of the checkpoints that's really helpful is the fact that when you create the brave space or attempting to create a brave space, the other person who's being on the receiving end is essentially being invited. So that means, yes, you can decline. You can say yes, right? Or you can say no. And I think that does a couple things. Number one, it creates a certain intentionality around the brave space because the person was invited and it wasn't thrusted upon them. So we can think of anything, especially in a professional setting, that was thrusted upon us, whether it was an argument or a project you didn't really want or feel like you're not ready for. And think about, like you said, um, how you have a heightened sense of maybe anxiety or a flight response, or you're essentially not at your best when you're going to tackle this very challenging thing. Whereas if I invite you, you're hopefully more likely to be more calm, take your time to think, gather your thoughts and emotions. You can even take time to think about it. You don't have to give me
Mm.
you don't have to come up with an ultimate yes or no in the moment. You can say, thank you for sharing that. Can I share with you this, at the end of the day or tomorrow, right? Take some time to gather yourself in doing so. Because then the other piece is, if you do say yes, now you're getting a committed person because I had time to think about it, process my thoughts, my feelings, and now I'm committed with you or these people in creating this brave space and tackling this challenging conversation. And then when you ask the question of who is responsible for creating the brave space, one pivotal piece that I'm also looking at and kind of partially we'll get some answers around this too in my data, but we can already see this dynamic when it comes to power dynamics in the workplace, right? So when there's a power differential, I think a lot of us have seen the dynamic where in an organization, the people with the power are the least likely to talk about power. They wield it, they have it, they use it,
It's no big
but they're less
deal.
likely to, yeah, explicitly to talk about it versus the people without the power. Don't they often talk about power? Like, well, why do they get to make these decisions? And look at them, they get to do this. So if I'm attempting to create a brave space, depending on which end of the spectrum I'm on with or without the power in this dynamic, let's say it's a one-on-one dynamic to keep the example simple. If I'm the one with the power, then I want to create the brave space in a certain way because I'm stepping into this dynamic with the power. Even though it may not have been said, it's known in this dynamic, I have the power. So I need to address that, or else it could be construed a certain way. Versus if I'm the other person, I'm the one without the power attempting to broach this very challenging topic, then it needs to be started in a different way because I don't have the power in this scenario, but I'm still attempting to start this very needed and important conversation with this person who in this dynamic has the power, right? So both can do it. They would just go about it differently because in this setting, in this organizational setting, we're on opposite ends of the power spectrum, if you will.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And this may so two follow-up questions. One would be whether it is a specific terminology that people would apply. So would they specifically say, okay, I need the brave space to tackle that, and would you like to join me? So that it's, and then as a follow-up question, is there kind of rules or a playbook? Okay, so because now I imagine it like a dojo.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's go
So,
into the dojo, and there are very clear rules on how you behave in the dojo and what you do and what you don't do.
right, essentially rules of engagement. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So first to your question about the terminology, yes, I would. There's not so in the scholarship, there's not necessarily specific terminology that needs to be used when you're creating a brave space. When I've been working with clients, I talk about how helpful it can be when you are essentially trying to inject this new idea into your culture. It helps to have identifiers or cues so people know like what we're doing, right? Because more than likely in a particular organizational culture, you already have that. There's certain buzzwords or phrases you can use, and people know exactly what that means. So it would be helpful when you're going to inject this new idea of a brave space in your culture to also have some terminology to go, oh, I know what we're doing now, especially when it's new. So oftentimes I will talk to clients to say, for the person who is initiating the brave space, and this is an example, they could say, I've been talking about, or excuse me, I've been, thinking about an incident uh, around, pay inequity that I would love to talk to you about. I'm going to attempt to be, brave and have a conversation around A, B, and C, with regards to pay. Is this something you would want to partner with me with? So if you heard the word brave, like, oh, I'm going to attempt to be brave, that tells me a couple things. Oh, we're doing this. We're trying to create a brave space, but also you said you're going to attempt to be brave, which is almost demonstrating your vulnerability because you're attempting to do this right as of now on your own because I haven't even said I'm going to join you yet, so you're kind of being vulnerable, putting yourself out there, and I recognize that and I can respect that. I can still accept or decline it if I want, but I recognize what's going on and I see you're attempting to be vulnerable in this moment too. And because you use that, now we can start to create this brave space. And then to your second part where you said, are there like rules of engagement? That's part of what I'm creating. What would that look like in an organizational setting? What would be the rules of engagement in a brave space in a one-on-one dynamic? And because that can be very different from engaging a small group if for leaders that have like a small team, and then that can be very different for a large group. If I'm a CEO or president talking to hundreds of people that I can't really hear people's reaction to. So one, I guess I'll say rule of engagement, if you will, in a one-on-one dynamic is addressing the power differential that exists. So what I mean by that is I sometimes when I'm doing workshops in this, I'll tell the story about years ago when I was a young professional still learning. I used to be in charge of organizing graduations. And the first year that I organized a graduation for a college is very difficult, first of all. So anybody that does it, that's listening, shout out to them. Anyway, but so this is very challenging. And the first one that I did, Miriam, that thing was horrible. That everything fell apart. And I mean everything. So at the very end of the graduation, I had this long list of notes of things I would do differently. So that is to say, I'm already thinking about how I would change my approach. Just then the president of the university, who I'd never met before, I knew his name. I seen emails from him, but I never met him or talked to him. He came up to me. And so this is our first interaction. He said that was the worst graduation I'd ever seen. Be in my office on Monday. And And a lot of my participants have heard this story already, but so they know how it ends. But my point is, um, in that moment, I'm a lowly, operations worker who's trying to put on this graduation for the very first time, and this is the president of the university, who's telling me this. My first time meeting him at that, and this is what he says to me. So if we were to apply that rule of engagement of creating a brave space of in terms of addressing the power differential that exists in that space, one way to approach that was for the president, his name was Alex. I always call him by name because I want him to hear this one day so we can talk. Alex Hernandez said to me, he said, he came up to me and said, or he could have said, hey, look, that was a rough go at this. I see what was going on. In my position and working in this university space for, 15 plus years, I've come in contact with a lot of people in your position as well as other positions that influence graduations. How about you come to my office and I can use some of my contacts and leverage some of my resources to help you do better in the next in the next go around next year? That still would have been somewhat intimidating, but I would have felt supported and I would understand better how he's going to use his power as he's addressing me for the first time. The president is addressing me, and I'm like, oh, this person with his power is coming to me. Yes, he recognized how bad of a job I did, but he also is going to use his power to leverage the resources and contacts to help me do better on the next one. So now I have a different understanding of the level of engagement that's going to occur in the next meeting when we do meet on Monday, as opposed to that was the most horrible graduation ever. Meet me in my office Monday. Because of your title and because it was left so ambiguous, I'm thinking I'm going to get fired. I'm like, oh, that's so that whole weekend I'm calling people like, you know, somebody who has a job. So again, if you're in a dynamic and trying to create a brave space and you have the power, you definitely want to address that, knowing that I'm the blah blah blah, I'm the title, this is the power, or this is the influence I have over this project, whatever it might be. This is how I plan to use it in the context of this conversation. Like, okay, um, now I can be at ease because people are always trying to read whether you're friend or foe.
Yeah.
They're trying to read your facial expressions, your cues, and of course, in an organizational setting, I'm going to take into consideration your title or the influence you have over, my position or my project or whatever it is. So if you could explicitly tell me how you plan on wielding this power in the context of this conversation, that's one rule that can potentially put me at ease. And if I still have questions around it, you would, if nothing else, open the door for me to ask questions about that. Like, oh, so you're telling me, are you going to do this with it? Oh yeah, now we can have a conversation around it. Versus if I don't say anything about it, then it's just left for me to guess. And people typically imagine the worst in those situations.
Yeah, for good reasons.
Yes.
And it's incredibly stressful. And
Yes.
I thank you for the example.
Mhm.
And would live in such a beautiful world if those in power would be so distinguished
Gracious.
in their communication, because I think the same can be true in any organization for a junior project manager messing up the first project and then suddenly a director leader coming to them saying the same words basically. And what came up for me is that for the president, it was this conversation isn't brave,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I wonder, or no, let me put it differently.
Mhm.
Using the words that he used in the real situation, like, this was the worst graduation, come to my office.
Right.
This is the opposite of brave. This
Right.
is using the power against you to show you that you were wrong.
Absolutely.
It would have been brave to show some humility, like,
Mhm.
oh boy,
Mhm.
I made similar mistakes when I was young. And
Right.
suddenly it becomes brave because it becomes human and
Abs-
vulnerable. Because
Absolutely.
what I loved in your previous example, the wording you used, I would like to make an attempt of being brave.
Hmm.
And the vulnerability that is in just this sentence, because it shows that I want to talk about something that I care about, because
Right.
otherwise there's no need for an attempt to be brave. It means
Yeah.
I acknowledge that it's difficult because otherwise I don't need to be brave.
Right.
I'm
Right.
acknowledging that I'm about to do something that is difficult to me. So I'm trusting you in that.
Hmm.
And I invite you to join me in that. But suddenly it's like reaching out the hand. Like, okay, I'm trusting you to be in this risky space with me.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think this sentence alone, if we could use it for any feedback conversation,
Yeah.
right?
Right. That'd be helpful.
It would be very helpful. Um,
Hmm.
because I think even managers who have to have a difficult or a negative, not to use constructive,
Right.
negative feedback conversation or evaluation with someone. Um,
Right.
it's also brave because it's difficult.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was just everything that was going on in my mind when I was hearing you speak. But maybe to
Yeah.
come back, so how do you then overcome these power differences? Because for the president or the leader, it's clearly not brave, at least not
Mhm.
if they are hiding behind their power.
If they're hiding behind their power. So having the conversation, broaching a tough conversation in of itself requires um, quite a few elements that I think are important. And regardless of your title, regardless of who has the power in that dynamic, um, it can be quite disarming when you do a few things. Like one of them, like I just said, was addressing the power differential. That was one of them, right? Explicitly doing so. Because now it becomes evident to both parties how the power can be used to help, the conversation along. But then also, if one or both parties are still unclear, we can have a kind of conversation around that. Well, help me further understand, Mr. President, how you're gonna, whatever it might be. The other thing is, there's, like I said earlier, there's a certain degree of risk that's being taken, and when the person who is attempting to create the brave space, when they show that they are taking a risk, it hopefully underscores another point that I often hammer home with my participants, which is brave work is messy work, right? So that is to say, I understand that more than likely it's going to be messy, which means I'm going to trip and fumble and mess up. I'm admitting that. I'm not saying I'm about to do this perfect process that's going to work harmoniously with what you have to say and share. It might not. And same thing for you. And I admit that. And that's, but it's okay. I'm still willing to do this with you or this group of people. The other thing about brave work is messy work is we might not come to a conclusion in one conversation. So let's go ahead and throw that out there. This may be a series of conversations. I said earlier, your response to wanting to join me in this brave work may not happen right now. That might take a day or two or whatever, a weekend, whatever it might be. So brave work is messy work, and that's okay. And I think when somebody who does have the power in that dynamic is willing to engage in this messy work, I think you have to almost kind of humble yourself in that, right? But so by if you choose to accept, it's like I'm willing to get down in the mud with you. So that in and of itself is almost kind of humbling. So imagine if, in my example, if the president would have done something along those lines, how that would look to someone like me to say, man, this person of this stature is taking the time to get down in the messy work and in the weeds of what we have to talk about despite his title and the things he has to do, he's willing to get down in the weeds with me. That signals something to me versus the very standoff cold, be in my office, and I'm going to go back to my ivory tower while you sit here. That looks very different, right? So brave work is messy work. And when you're able to show that you want to do the messy work with me, that signals, man, we're like a little bit more on par together.
Oh, it's so obvious and it's a bit duh, but
Mhm.
how often um, people would call others in their office to, yeah, to basically lecture them about their mistakes. And it's
Mhm.
such a waste of energy and kind of positive vibes, learning opportunities, creativity, where they could use the exact same amount of time
Right.
to actually co-create a solution to make it better, to
Yeah.
use, as you said, the potential of the power difference.
Yeah.
Um, and
Absolutely.
instead, it just becomes this channel to offload anger, basically, and
Mhm.
disappointment and frustration. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you. I just realized how sad that actually is.
Yeah. Right. Right. Um, another I think element that really helps with the power dynamic when you're trying to create a brave space is also just a certain degree of emotional intelligence. So obviously with brave work as well as specifically with emotional intelligence, that is more so of a journey. Obviously, there's not just like a destination, like I've arrived and I haven't, I'm flawless with it. That's not the case. We're all trying to grow, but uh, when someone realizes that there is a growth opportunity with their emotional intelligence, and even more specifically with being with mindfully listening,
Mhm.
I think that really helps because typically, for example, think about if, for yourself, Miriam, as well as anybody listening, I'd be curious to have folks think about how you typically feel or how you felt the last time someone um, approached you with a challenging topic. They like, especially when they did it in a gentle way. I'm not talking about like how Alex did it when he was like in my office. I'm not even talking about like that. I'm talking about if they just come to you in the most gentle, just honest and vulnerable way and say, okay, I'd like to talk to you about something you said yesterday. I can just say that part. I didn't even tell you what you said, and the person probably starts feeling something. You're right. Their heart starts racing, you start getting warm, right? I didn't even tell you what you said yet. And when you're mindfully listening, that's when you're very aware of your thoughts and your emotions, especially as it relates to how you're about to respond, right? So an example I often use is sometimes people say, someone's talking to you very loudly and aggressive. And maybe you pointed out, hey, thanks for telling me, but why are you yelling? Or why are you? And then they shout, I'm not yelling. And you're like, so you're not, so that means there's a disconnect between what you're feeling and and how you're responding, right? Or what you're doing. There's a disconnect. You don't even know what you just did just now. So going back to my original example of when someone says, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this challenging topic. If you're mindfully listening, that means I'm taking all this in, what you're sharing with me. And I'm very mindful about, okay, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? And how is that connected to what I'm about to say to you now in response, or how I'm reacting? Am I tapping a pen? Am I clenching my teeth? Or whatever. Like, how was that? And when you're aware of that connection, then that means now I can be more in control of how I respond. Now I don't have to yell because I'm like, oh, you know what? I am feeling kind of hot and kind of warm. Oh, this must be angering me. Okay, let me be mindful because if I say something now, I'm gonna shout at this person, and there's no need because they didn't even say anything. But I need to shout at them, right? And I think that mindful listening piece allows you to keep all that in check. And I imagine if I think about Alex, for example, I imagine he probably felt something that I don't know what, I don't know how, maybe graduation was really something personal to him, or maybe whatever it was, there was a connection there
Yeah.
that he may not be aware of that made him say, my office, on Monday and walk away. There was no question, there was no conversation, there was comment, 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 and I'm leaving. And there was some emotion attached to that. And I don't even know if he was aware
Yeah.
of what he was feeling and thinking. And to be honest, I don't think I was aware of in the moment what I was feeling or thinking. It was only many years later.
Yeah. It's funny. So last podcast episode with Miriam, she was speaking about exactly that. And she said, stupid stressed people are stupid, right? Because our brains don't function anymore.
Right,
So I'm not shouting.
right,
That's where the disconnection is, right? Because also we don't sense our emotions anymore. We don't sense our body anymore the
right.
moment we are in fight, flight, freeze.
Yeah,
Um, and we rarely control our triggers. How funny if Alex would say, "Oh yeah, graduation was the big moment because I was the first family member in in our family who got to graduate, and it was the first time that my father told me that he loved me and that he was proud of
right.
me, and that's why it's important to him."
Absolutely.
And poor you ruined that for him.
I never done until I ruined the whole graduation for everyone in the world, right?
Yeah, because I think honestly, I think 80% of all these feedback conversations is someone projecting their own stuff on someone
Hmm.
else.
Right.
Um, and then as long as we cannot calm down their nervous systems
Yeah.
and then have the conversations to really address the matter of fact and leave all the stories out, we
Yeah.
cannot achieve anything anyway.
Hmm. And then honestly, that does create a bit of a conundrum, Miriam, to your point again earlier, or your question about what does this look like with folks that have the power and things of that nature. On the opposite end, for the individual, for the professional attempting to broach the topic, uh, or feeling like they need to broach the topic, who doesn't have the power. I think about people of color who are working in predominantly white spaces, for example, or, if you talk about women, or if you talk about transgender, so on and so forth, folks who don't traditionally have the power in some of these spaces, um, you're asking you're asking for them to take a disproportionate amount of the load to create this space because not only may I not have, it might be the fact that I don't have the power in title, right, for the organization, but also just in society. Like, again, if I'm a person of color or something along those lines, and now you're asking me to broach the topic around a microaggression because I'm black or something along those lines, and that can be even more challenging. And for some people, I'm just I'm a black male, so I'm thinking about um, let's say other black males, black women, for example. We've more than likely have already done that a lot, right? So if I've already done that all throughout my educational career and through a vast majority of my professional career, and now I learned if I'm being critical of myself. I'm sitting through this workshop of a brave space, and now you're asking me to do this, this work, this messy work, that more likely is going to occur with, let's say, with this white male who also has the power in title as well. Um, and you want me to do this again? It's like, and this white male is like, I haven't even had to do this. So technically, you more than likely have more runway, if you will, to do this because you haven't had to engage in these spaces as much. While I've already done this maybe not a brave space, but broached these conversations 1,000 times. So I'm tired and I don't want to do this. So now I can see why some people might sit back and go, I don't want to do, you do it. You have the power. You're the white male you've had the privilege or the advantage to not have to broach these spaces. So you're not as worn out as me. So you do it. I don't want to do it. I'm gonna sit back and I'll let this department burn unless you are brave enough to step up and set the tone. So it's having those conversations that can become extremely challenging. And there's no one size fits all. There's no one answer. But that's what I'll also be attempting, again, like I said, through my research as well as through my experience. And as I even continue my research with interviews to what that work can look like when a disproportionate amount of the burden can oftentimes be placed on the marginalized individual, if you will. So
What would be your advice in this case? Because I think, yeah, exactly. How do you approach such a conversation? How can you invite in a brave space also to take the disproportionate risk? Because as you
mhm.
say, you're marginalized, you're already at risk and feeling vulnerable. And then if it's especially addressing maybe an harassment or setting a boundary. I mean, setting a
Mhm.
boundary.
Yeah, yeah.
What would be your advice to do it in a way that is constructive and most likely to get to a yes, I want to join you in this brave space?
Right. I think again, there's no one size fits all, but speaking about my personal experience, I would say to still initiate, for the person of color or that person that feels like they don't have the power and they're already worn down and worn out by having these conversations, still invite the individual to create that brave space because creating a brave space opens up the channels to have that conversation around. If we engage in this work again, if I'm using the running into a burning building together analogy, I would tell I'm a black man, so I would ask the white male CEO to say, hey, okay, I want to run into this burning building so we can save the organization, the team, our professional relationship, the project, whatever it is. But I have to admit, I've run in that building 1,000 times. So I have to admit, I'm not gonna be running as fast. So here's where I'll be beneficial. I'll be beneficial in this tandem in pointing out some of the blind spots that maybe you haven't noticed because I'm a person of color, or because I currently work in a department you haven't been in 10 years, or whatever it might be. So here's where I can be beneficial. Here's where I'm not going to be beneficial. I'm not going to be as beneficial, maybe when it comes to being honest about, pay inequity and how it relates to the organization, because I've already seen it and I don't want to talk about it for 100 times. But you know what it is, and you can certainly be beneficial. Again, if you so choose to accept the invitation, right? So this is what you're accepting. And if they accept, then hopefully they'll be okay with if I'm going to quantify it, dividing it up 60-40. I'll do 40, you do 60, because we're going to have this conversation. And again, it's messy work. So it's going to be a messy conversation, but now we opened up the channels to have that conversation. This is a conversation that more likely wouldn't even be had if I wouldn't if I wouldn't invite them into this space. And what I would essentially be doing is um, saying it's okay to maintain the status quo. Like, let's just, I guess, keep doing what we're already doing, which I'm not happy with that either. But it's to say, yeah, let's do this. Let's do this work. But here's how I can be helpful. Based on my background and based on what I've seen, I can be helpful in this way, not this way.
Yeah.
Can you fill in those gaps? Yes or no? And we can take it from there and negotiate, if you will.
Yeah. And what I hear is lots of clarity in the terms and clear boundaries. Okay, so here's what I'm up for. This is what I'm offering. This is what I'm not offering.
What I'm not going to do, right?
And this is a potential objective. And here's what's in it for you.
Right, right.
So to be very explicit in what it's about and what it's not about, and thereby also maybe mitigating some of the risk of taking the first step.
And it might, and to your point, it might not be, you might not see the benefit right away, right? Because the person you're inviting might say no. They're like, no, that sounds like too much for me. But what if it pays dividends later? Because that vulnerability that I saw, I can't unsee that. The fact that you just asked me doesn't mean you'll be the last person to ask me. Again, if we're trying to inject this into our culture, maybe you asked me in December, and then 3 months later, someone asked me about a different topic later, and then I see this as a thing. If I'm a real leader, I'm going to notice the trend and say, I got to address this at some point. And even if I don't address it, again, if somebody in this organization is a real leader, somebody else is seeing this like, okay, I notice he has been approached 3 times, about 3 different topics that he declined to engage in when it comes to creating break space. But I notice it. So I'm a different leader. I'll engage in this process, somebody. But if nobody in the organization is willing to step up and change, which I've seen before, then obviously you have a real problem on your hands. And it means you definitely need a brave space culture mentality with the leadership team in of itself. You can't expect every single leader to make the right decision, but if as a leadership team, if no one can finally step up, then that's obviously problematic. If we can't hold each other accountable, that's clearly a problem. And I've seen that before as well as it pertains to race inequity in an organization in their attempts to get things going in a different direction. And everyone's turning a blind eye because there's so much tenure in that organization, and there's so much, what am I trying to say? Yeah, there's so much continuity with leadership and the way they see things that it's hard to make that change. Because to make a change, I almost have to, in a sense, turn my back on the rest of leadership and be the first to step out and be brave and essentially make that change and turn things in the other direction. But yeah, I've said a lot.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. So the last example is basically that it would need the one very brave leader to step up, and then hoping that the others will follow.
Yeah, so some of the benefits to creating a brave space, and this is no different than just essentially when you have a professional that feels comfortable and they feel like they have a certain degree of autonomy and they can be authentic in the spaces, obviously you're going to be more productive, right? I'm going to do more because I can be me, right? And communication will be more will be open, and it'll be more authentic as well. I feel like I can say what I have to say because again, I can be me, and I feel like there will be no retaliation when I share my ideas and things of that nature. So. And then also there'll be greater team cohesion in that case, right? So when we create a brave space within a team, then that means brainstorming sessions sound very different when it's a brave space versus when it's not a brave space. That means failing in let's say with a team project looks very different. We can all learn from that team project failure differently, faster. We can fail forward because it's a brave space versus if it's not a brave space. So if you have one leader that is brave and does this with, let's say, just their team, their department, then hopefully the results of what that looks like will speak volumes of the benefit of creating a brave space without them having to tell their colleagues, and they'll see like, man, like there's great benefits to doing that. Maybe I should try because look how well their team or their department's performing by
Mm.
stepping out and doing that. Maybe I can just do it myself, right? And not only that, they're modeling that behavior too. That's the biggest thing. They're showing me what it looks like because understandably so, again, like I said, there's an element of risk there. And it's hard to do that if you're just telling it to me. But if you demonstrate, if you see it, then
Mm.
it's like, oh, I saw them just go through that. I saw them have that tough conversation and come out on the other end better for it. Then I saw them do it again and again and again. So, so it's repeatable and it's demonstrable. So now I don't mind doing it myself. I feel like there's less risk because now I've seen the results. It's not as scary, it's not as intimidating, and I'm looking at the benefits. And if I'm a real leader that wants real results, you have to do what's working, and that seems to be working over there,
Yeah.
right? But someone has to do it, right? Someone has to do the work.
So in your workshops and when you work with teams, what are the obstacles that you notice? What is in the way? Because it sounds like, of course, we all want that. What is holding them back, and what can you do about it?
One thing is, that we talked about was power, right? So the idea of um, maintaining, I guess, your facade of power and what that looks like, because understandably so, people don't want to be, I guess, what they would consider vulnerable or too vulnerable to where it looks like, oh, now it looks like you don't know what you're doing, or now it looks like you're just a regular human, or you have questions too, you have doubts too. So that's one thing that holds people back is like, I don't know, I'm a leader in this organization. Do I really want to admit that I don't know something, or admit that I get angry, or admit that I have anxiety, or I don't want to admit that, right? So that's one thing that facade of power, and wanting to maintain that can certainly be holding individuals back. Um, again, that's risk, that's vulnerability. There's a lot of things, there's a lot that goes into that. Um, and then also patience also holds people back because it's not a quick fix, obviously. This isn't, it's like I said, brave work is messy work. So more than likely it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be a quick fix. And oftentimes, like we were talking earlier about how in a workshop or in any type of learning experience, more than likely the participants aren't going to learn, everything that you're sharing in that workshop, everything in that learning experience. And oftentimes the art of facilitation and the art of designing, a workshop or curriculum, things of that nature is going to run contrary to the needs of a business. Like, yeah, teach us how to dismantle racism all in Q1. It's like that's not how that works. I understand you have a time limit. I get it. I understand you have a budget. I get it. But there's more, to it. So one of the obstacles is gonna be the patience piece. Like, can you do this all in Q1, or can you all do this, can you do all this work in a year, whatever it might be? And it's like, no, it might take longer. So there's going to be a certain degree of patience, and we'll have to be creative in how do we wrap this brave work around your financial constraint, or wrap this brave work around your calendar, your leader's calendar. Everyone's busy, whatever it might be. So that's usually another challenge. Oh, everyone's busy and all over the place, or we only have Q1 to do it, and that we only have a month available, whatever it might be, or we only have certain funds to do this, and those restraints. So we try to work around that. And to your question too, I just created uh, a Brave Space leadership cohort that I'll be starting next spring. And I specifically designed it to be flexible because of that, because I understood that was one of the constraints, which is how do we do this work and bring everybody together for a workshop? Well, you don't have to bring everybody together. You can just bring an individual from different organizations. You can bring one person from this organization. I'm asking another client to bring one person, so on and so forth. And now you have this group of leaders from different spaces, right? So it's accommodating based on your schedules. It's every other week, so it's not like a dedicated 4 hour, or it's not, a long week long. It's every other week for 90 minutes, very intentional. And it's designed around specific issues that the people in that cohort are experiencing. So hopefully by the time you come out of that experience, we have discussed your specific situation and how a brave space can help your very specific situation. So you get a lot out of that, and there's a lot of introspective um, thought that's going to go into it, because we're talking about you and your situation to a certain degree. And it allows you to also listen to someone else's situation and be on the outside looking in and go, what would I do in their situation? How can I apply that to what I'm going through, right? So hopefully that allows people uh, to still get what they need, and be patient around seeing results. Because again, I understand doing this work, like a lot of facilitators, I'm sure see the same thing. It's hard to schedule
Yeah.
your work around people's schedules and things of that nature. So
Yeah. And what becomes more and more apparent to me is really the relevance of getting permission or the buy-in from the other person.
mhm,
Because otherwise, if you assume that you're in a brave space,
mhm.
and because it shapes the way you speak, right? You might be
Right.
more blunt, more direct, less sugarcoating, because you assume, okay, we're in a brave space, so we can have the tough conversations.
Mhm.
If the other person is not aware of it, it might come across as bullying,
Right. Yes.
right?
Right.
Where do you What are the safety measures in this? So I'm thinking of when we're in a sparring. So we're in the dojo, we are
Yeah.
sparring, and then there's always the okay, time out
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. The safety word, like, hold on,
safety
you broke my
word.
nose.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah. So that's a good question. That's a good question. And Miriam, do you do any sparring by any chance? Do you do any fighting?
I used to. I used
Okay,
to,
okay. You said
yeah.
that quiet. I was like, why do you buy? Um, um, that's a good question though. So there's quite a few that I'll be adding to this book based on what I've shared and experienced, and I know there'll be more once I'm done hashing out the research. But a couple of the things is, number one, being very explicit in the beginning as you are creating the brave space about the goals of in the intention of the tough conversation, right? Because very often people can make assumptions and get mad. So if I say, hey, Miriam, I would like to, I'm going to attempt to be brave here, and I would love to talk to you about a microaggression, that I noticed. You might start making other assumptions and getting really angry about it. And I might be talking about something different. I might be talking about something maybe not that you did, maybe something someone on your team did. And I want to partner with you to talk about that. But you made the assumption I was talking about you, and now you're all angry. But if I'm very explicit about, my goals and my intention in this conversation, like, oh, I know what you're talking about. It's not too, it's nothing ambiguous. You specifically said you want to address a microaggression that someone on my team demonstrated last week. Now I know, okay. And you also demonstrated that you were very clear that you're not looking for any type of, retaliation or a reprimand. You want some coaching on how to best proceed on the project with this person. Oh, okay. I can calm down. I don't feel like you're coming at me now. I feel better. Thank you for being very clear. Or if I still don't get it, you've opened the door for me to ask questions now, right? Like, does that make sense? You go, wait a minute. Are you talking about me, or are you talking about someone on my team? Oh, you're talking about someone on my team. Okay, got it. Thank you for clarifying that. Another thing is too, you ask for consent to asking difficult questions. That leads me to that piece. So again, let's say we're talking about microaggressions. I'm going to that one. And I say, so, Miriam, I'm going to attempt to be brave here. And, I want to, I'm hoping I'll be able to have a conversation with you around a microaggression that I experienced last week. But in doing so, I have to admit, more likely I'm going to have to ask, it's going to require me to ask some challenging conversations around race and how it pertains to myself and the team, and also around how race may impact, the way my work is perceived and the way I'm perceived. How does that sound? Like, how does that land with you? And then now I'm asking you and letting you know that that this is going to require me to ask some tough questions and things of that nature, some tough topics. How do you feel about that? Now you're like, man, that's kind of tough. Now you can say, I've never talked about race, or you might go, oh, that's not a problem. I'm ready for that, or anything in between. But I'm getting consent to ask maybe some challenging questions around that, and you can tell me if that's okay or not, or if you need some space and some time to digest that first as well. Getting that consent is
Yeah.
huge, and that's big in the dojo.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of a trigger warning,
Right. Yeah,
right? For
trigger.
some videos, you're like, okay, so in this video, you might see if you have experienced anything
Mhm.
with XYZ, maybe you don't watch. So it's
Right.
they want to have a conversation about this,
Right.
and then it's like a trigger warning.
Yes.
Because if it is a conversation about race, um, the other person might indeed first want to take a moment to do some research, to
Right.
realize that they actually never had such a conversation, and they
Right.
might not be aware of their unconscious bias. Um,
Hmm.
and then a little bit of preparation might actually take a lot of the steam out. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that's huge when people are able to do, at least if nothing else, those two things, which can really set the stage. And again, it's a part of the invitation, right? So if you think about an invitation you get in the mail to like um, a fancy dance or gala or something along those lines, think about all the prep that goes into that fancy invitation, right? Think about like the invitation sometimes put in a fancy envelope, right?
Mhm.
The fancy envelope has fancy handwriting on it, right? There's all these layers to this nice invitation, right? Now I can give you an invitation and say, "Hey, Mary, you want to come to this fancy gala?" Now I invited you, but that wasn't a nice, a nice, well put together invitation, was it? I invited you though, but it didn't seem like it was well thought out. You don't feel like
Like
you
the
were really thought
care.
of. Right. It
Mm.
didn't feel like I really care as much. And I can be defensive and go, well, I invited her. What's her problem? I invited her, right? But some of these rules of engagement that you're asking about, the rules in the dojo, or some of the layers, if you will, that also help define like what this invitation can look like. So the other person feels like they feel like you care, they don't feel as threatened,
Yeah.
and they feel like they have a better definition of what they're being invited to. So when
Mm.
they're in it, they don't feel as blindsided because I know how you're going to use your power. You told me you were going to ask challenging conversations around gender or whatever it might be. You also told me what you hope to get out of this conversation before asking me, do I want to partner with you in this? I feel like you really took some care for this invitation, and I'm more likely to say yes to this fancy invitation versus this raggedy invitation. You just like, yeah, you want to come with me to the dance? It's like, no, I don't want to come with you to that, right? So these are some of the rules that build the invitation.
Yeah. I like that. And it reminds me a bit of the radical candor framework
Hmm.
by Kim Scott, that she says,
Yep.
in order to do the radical candor, you do need to care.
Hmm.
Because if there's no care involved, then it will turn into bullying very quickly.
Right. It can.
Yeah.
It can.
And hence and that refers to something you mentioned earlier, but now it makes total sense to also be aware of your own nervous system status, because if you're aroused and angry, um,
Right.
you cannot invite someone into a brave space because you'll
Nope.
break their nose
You're right. Exactly. Exactly right. It'd be
if you
very
stay in the
intimidating.
dojo.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Right. Right.
yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Mm, intriguing.
Hmm. Hmm.
What remains your facilitation challenge?
That's easy. So in particular, when I'm facilitating a larger group, like, 100, 200, I just did one this past Friday, which, maybe about 80. So, when it gets large groups like that, um, oftentimes I try not to do this, but oftentimes or sometimes I'll do like some time for them to talk amongst themselves to do something as group work or something along those lines. Something that can be annoying and draining sometimes is bringing those groups back to the larger group to, like, the focus back to the stage, if you will, especially when you're dealing with groups that are just, exceptionally chatty that day. They just really want to talk amongst themselves that day. And that could be draining. And it's at times like that you just wish you had like a big bullhorn, just press a big bullhorn and just disrupt everything. Like, hey, it wasn't me, it was the bullhorn. And doing something along those lines, that is probably just one of the biggest challenges. One, I eventually became aware of that so much that one time I did uh, a workshop. It was maybe a little over 200 people. It was like 2 years ago in April, I remember. And I was like, this with this workshop, it was the intergenerational workforce. So it was, how do you navigate a workforce when you have, different generations working there and things of that nature. And I had all these great, breakouts I can do and all this. And I was like, this is not gonna work with 200 people. It's just too far back for me to try to bring that many people back in. I was like, there's just no way. So the content was easy. It was like, how do I design it to where I don't have to keep doing that? Because I don't want to be doing that. I'm going to get tired. It was a 3 hour workshop. And I was like, I'm going to get too tired trying to do that. So I designed it to where even though I did activity, all the activities we did were either all together. So I had things that we would answer, like I'd have like a true or false quiz, and I'd get folks to just answer out loud to me, or I would do, I love doing role plays because the person on spot, like they're definitely locked in because now they're in front of everybody else, in front of, in this case, 200 people. So they're locked in. But then everybody else is looking because now they want to see how that person is going to do, like, oh, what they're going to say and what are they going to do. And now everyone's paying attention, but I'm still able to do like an activity that feels inclusive because even though it's just me and one other individual, everyone else is locked into what we're now doing up front. And I even did a couple activities where I brought a few people up front. I did like an activity where they had to pick a generation based on some questions, and they had to stand in a certain spot. And so everyone's moving around around the stage. Um, so that was one way to avoid that because I hate bringing everybody back to center when there's a lot of people. It's just draining. It's draining. So yeah.
Yeah, it is. And especially if you have only 3 hours.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then, yeah, the question is what would bring them back? What is the kind of the Easter egg that would
So
motivate them to come back?
exactly. There's a lot of different ways that have been effective. Like with certain audiences, you can do like the whole clap method where, if you hear my voice clap once and then that gets some people, if you hear my voice clap twice and more people, and hopefully by the third time, like everyone's locked in now. So you can do that with certain audiences. Some, you know, uh, hyper corporate environments that doesn't work as well. So you might just have like a noise. I had one colleague that I co-facilitated with. They had a bell, and I was like, "Good, let's just use that. Let's use your bell." And we
Mm.
just did that. But then I felt like a Salvation Army kind of Santa, just ringing the bell every time it was time to end. So it felt weird, but it worked. It was effective, and I had to use my voice.
Mm.
So I've had some other ways too, but it's I think one day I'll just probably break down and purchase a horn, but that one workshop where I just brought folks up and did different activities that way, that was almost a masterpiece because it was nonstop. We kept it going. People loved that workshop, and I got so many referrals from that one workshop.
Mm.
I'm still getting referrals from that one workshop. It was done really well. But admittedly, it was only done. I only did it that way to avoid that one specific issue, but it ended up having other benefits unintended benefits. So
And isn't
yeah.
that, hmm, that's actually very interesting because it's one thing to avoid something that's uncomfortable and that we dislike.
Hmm.
And it's another thing to do it creatively in a way that
Right.
then even creates unintended benefits. And
Yes.
I think
Yes.
that's the beauty of admitting, okay, this is something that I don't like. It drains
Right.
my energy. I don't want that. How can I
Right.
design it differently
Right.
instead of pushing us? Because I
Hmm.
think as a facilitator, in order to hold space for so many people, we need to feel at our best. And if we're doing something that drains us, we cannot be in service of them.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
then to be
Absolutely.
honest and brave about that, okay, I do it differently.
Right.
I like
Right.
that. Good learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would be the advice that you would give your younger self when you just started the work?
Oh boy. I'd probably say um, there's probably a lot of things, Miriam. You shouldn't have asked that. That's a whole that's a whole book. But if I had to pick one, I would probably say to be patient. And when I say that, I mean be patient with learning the business side of what I do. I felt like I had the talent to do what I'm doing for a long time, even before I knew I had the talent. When I look back, it's always been there. And then people would always tell me it's there, but it didn't mean anything to me because I didn't know this profession existed. I didn't know this was a thing. So telling me I did really good in the presentation didn't mean it was nice, but it was like, okay. And I didn't know you could make money off of it. So, but then once I knew this was a profession, in my mind, I thought I would instantly just make money once people saw what I did. And obviously that's not what happened. So that's why I would say be patient with learning the business of it. Yes, the talent's there, but you need to understand the business of how to get clients, how to bring more value than just facilitating. How do you take time to learn specifically the needs of that client, that organization, so you can tailor your workshop, your learning experience for what they need. How do you then gather data afterwards during the workshop? So afterwards, you can follow up with them and tell them what you observed from their participants and how they gathered the talent. Then also, how do you, follow up with them to then give them recommendations for further learning if they want to continue their growth in that. So I didn't know any of that. All I knew is I'm good in front of people, and like a lot of facilitators and speakers and teachers and that I meet, they'll tell me they're introverts or
Mm.
ambiverts. I feel like I'm the same way. I don't need to be in front of people, um, but I'm just good doing it. So that's why another reason why it wasn't as evident to me that this was a thing, because I didn't feel like I needed to do it. Just when I was called to do it, I did it well, and then I went back to my corner to go do what I do. So I needed to be more, I'm gonna say more extrovert, but more intentional with, again, seeking clients, what they need, connecting dots between some of the themes that I'm noticing, creating content, and essentially doing what I'm doing now. Like this whole topic of a brave space came about because again of the thing I need to start learning how to do. Like when you hear an idea, jot it down, research the content. How does this connect to what my clients are seeing? And when I saw specifically talking about a brave space, when I read more about a brave space and what it is, I was like, man, a lot of my clients, this is what they need. This is what they're dealing with issues with identity and power dynamics and avoiding tough conversations and the issues that stem from not having those conversations at all or having them incorrectly. Like, yeah, this is what they need. So how do you design something around that? How do you promote that? Instead of letting them tell you what they need, which you there's a piece of that, but then also saying, also let me recommend this, like learn how to do that. There was just a whole business. How do you know what to charge? And just so all that, just how do you tell them no sometimes when they say, hey, I need you to help me, I don't know, fix racism in my organization in 6 months. Instead of going, okay, how do you learn to say, no, I can help, but this is how I can do it. How do you find your voice to be able to say that? Um, just so I would tell myself, be patient with answering all those questions and learning how to do all those things because I didn't know any of that. I thought the talent's there, so the money should be there too. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And thank you for breaking it down. I think it's yeah, I think everyone who has started building a business can relate to that. And everyone who thought, oh, I have a product. The most important thing is to have the product and not even thinking about selling the
Right.
product.
Nope. You weren't even thinking about it.
Yeah,
Weren't even thinking about it.
yeah. And it's as you were speaking, I was just thinking, yeah, it's brave to start to go solo and to start your own business. And it's
Hmm.
messy.
Yes. Yes, it
The
is
brave
messy.
work is messy.
Yeah, brave work is messy work.
You'll throw
Absolutely.
spaghetti against the wall and see whether they stick, and you have to listen and to do the work. Yeah.
And some people thrive in that space though. Even though, like you said, it's messy. Some people thrive in that mess. They thrive in that chaos. Because in some ways, it's almost like there's more freedom in that chaos. Like
Mm.
working for an organization, sometimes you can feel like you're in a box. And I felt like that, even throughout, my academic career. Um, I felt like you're in a box and whatever talent you do have aren't appreciated or aren't lifted up, aren't pointed out because it doesn't make sense in this box. So why do I wouldn't point that out? It doesn't make sense. That's not being graded. So I'm not going to point that out. And same thing in a professional setting. That's not on your job description. So I'm not going to point out those talents or it's not needed right now or in that way. But when you do the messy work of striking out on your own, starting a business, all of a sudden those talents that didn't make sense in school or maybe didn't make as much sense in certain organizations, they can make as much sense as you want with your organization because you could potentially design your company, your organization, your business around your talents. And then now they become very relevant. Now it's like, no, do more of that. That thing that they didn't ask you to do with that business, we need you to do that. Like, go, I want you to do that now. Go speak as much as you want. Tell us. It's a very interesting shift. It's a
Mm.
very, very, very interesting shift.
Yeah, and
Um,
then the mindset work around that, because we have been told. So if it's as you said, coming from, I've never thought of that. That most of us entrepreneurs, we broke out from a different system. We were told, okay, not this, not that, just that. And then
mhm.
suddenly to have the freedom to focus on exactly what we're and allowed to do needs an entire mindset shift of giving ourselves the permission to do that,
Right,
and not
right.
holding back and self-censoring because, oh, I'm too much, I'm not supposed to, that's not welcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I was in academia as well, working at a university before going solo,
Hmm.
and realizing that the box was too small. The box of,
Hmm.
and in Europe it's public service. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, I can imagine.
yeah, I
I
needed
can
more
imagine.
degrees of freedom and more creativity.
Yeah, yeah. And I know for myself, I know what it's like to be, like you said, in that box as well. And I know what it's like to not have a box at all. I went, it was years ago, I was unemployed. I had no box.
Mm.
And now you're free, and now you have the decision to go seek out another box, which is another job which I knew in the back of my mind would do the same thing. They'll want some skills, but then the rest of them say, we don't need that, throw that away. So I can seek that out, or I can go seek out creating my own business. But I know that's going to take time, that's going to take capital, and you have nothing. So do you take that risk? Right. So it's very challenging to make that decision. Um, so it's like, well, how do you, so I have a lot of, I should say a lot, but I've heard a lot of folks ask this question. I've had some entrepreneurs ask me this question, which is, how do you start that business, especially if you're currently working for an employer? Do you start the business while you're working um, for somebody else and start your consultant career, your
Side
facilitation
hustle.
career? Do you do that, or do you just strike out? Do you just leave the job behind altogether, and just strike it on your own and just start a free, got all the time and things of that nature? And there's not a one right answer. I don't think the way I did it was, just working for an organization, starting out small, but that's because that's how it just happened. Um, how I got started the third time when it worked out. And I started out with a project that kind of landed in my lap when I didn't know what I was doing, but it worked out. And again, it's amazing how when I do projects, when I was asked to facilitate a retreat for a department, and I know had I been working for an organization and I'm given a project, they give you all the parameters, and when you do it, they go, that's okay. Nothing special. You did it. Check. Go on to the next thing. But when I do it as this consultant now, hey, I need you to facilitate the retreat. I need you to design the whole experience. And Miriam, let me tell you, had I facilitated a retreat before? No. Had I even been to a retreat prior to this? No. Did I know what a retreat was? Vaguely. But I had a meeting and they told me what they wanted. We want this, we want this, we want that. There's going to be about 50 people there, and I think it was a half day, and it'll be a half day. We want to be interactive, and they had a whole list of stuff, and I'm writing this stuff down. And if you want to talk about imposter syndrome, that was me because I was like, I don't know what they're talking about. I was writing it down. And I was like, oh yeah, dude, oh, you want that? Oh, that's gonna be great. And and I put it together and I did it and they loved it and they called me back again and said, "Hey, can you do this other stuff?" And it was amazing how when I was given all the reins and all the freedom to put it together, it's excellent. But when
Mm.
I'm again boxed in an organization, you're telling me kind of how to do something. It's average, but I couldn't do what I wanted to do, but because I had to do what you wanted me to do and just try to execute what was in your head instead of executing what was in my mind, essentially. So like I said, there's a certain freedom, to doing this work. And it's scary, but I love it and it's what works. it's what's been working. So
Nice. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Dauv.